This is Carrie Goetz. I'm the CTO and principal here at StrategITcom, and I was asked to talk to you a little bit about STEM, my journey in this industry. How I got into STEM and all that kind of good stuff. So for me, as far as discovering a passion for the STEM sector, I don't know that there was really an aha moment where, the lights went off and I said, "Ooh, I'm going to do this forever." I was always one of those people that really enjoyed working on puzzles on one hand and solving things. I really enjoyed math when I was in school, but I also had this other side where I was really feeding the creative side of my brain. So I played several musical instruments. I painted. I was in the theater department. And so for me, it wasn't really a one side or the other. I think there's the ability to really be able to use both sides. And I kind of, like most people my age, fell into my career anyway. It wasn't something that I set out when I was young and said, I'm going to be a programmer, I'm going to do networking. Matter of fact, networking didn't even exist when I was in college the first time, or I'm going to do any of those things. I really just was blessed to be exposed to a lot of those things in my working career that kind of pushed me along in different paths. And so for me, it's been great. I've got about 4 million miles under my belt doing projects literally all over the globe. I've been able to see amazing sites all over the planet and I have this huge extended family all over the globe. So it's really been a great career for me. And then as far as challenges in the data center industry as a woman, like I said, I kind of fell into this. So the data center industry wasn't actually an industry when I started out. It was, back then we had mainframes that sat in a very, very cold computer room, and we had dumb terminals, and you would connect terminals up to it. And so you get to solder on connectors and stuff, which doesn't sound like fun now, but believe me, when you're young and just trying stuff out, it's pretty fun. Being able to write code and start a program from its infancy and say that, you want it to be able to do this and it needs to look this way and this way and this way. And then you have to figure out how you're going to write all that data, how you're going to get that data back out and solve it. All of that was stuff that was really interesting and fun to me. But, I started that in college a little bit, and then I went back to college years later and got a degree in architectural design. And after I got that degree, I started teaching computer-aided engineering at a junior college here. And so that was architectural, structural, mechanical, civil, electrical. Did I say electrical? Anyway, so all the different specialties. So I got exposed to all of these different things. And then AutoCAD came out, and teaching AutoCAD was a lot of fun. It was sort of a way to combine the two, and very much like writing a code. As you start building a model of anything in AutoCAD, you really, you start from a blank slate, and then you just create upon that, and then create some more and create some more. And so you really get to use that creative side. So I thought, oh, this is pretty good. And then they had a project where they wanted to tie a bunch of campuses together. And back then, networking was in its infancy. Nobody knew really kind of anything about it. We were just getting rid of dial-up and having to dial into different machines and actually have frame relay circuits and circuits where things could talk to each other. And so since I wasn't afraid of a computer, they asked if I would take that on, and I did. And turned out I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed the telecommunications side. I enjoyed being able to put all these pieces together and make them talk and, bring sites live and solve all this. And so from there, that turned into really kind of my career. So I consulted for a long time. I set up a couple networking divisions at a few companies. I ended up being what's the equivalent now of a CIO at a couple companies. And then, as part of that, data centers also evolved at the same time. And data centers now became the network central part where it wasn't just mainframes. We were bringing on Intel-based servers and Unix-based servers and all of these other things, and making sure that all of those communicate equally, and learning their protocols and learning their operating systems. It just became this never-ending learning thing. And to me, that's actually my passion. It's not really STEM. It's not really the creative side. It's the learning new stuff and making things happen and watching things evolve and figuring out better ways to do things from the way they used to do. And so it's just been really, really a blast to do that. And as far as facing those challenges as a woman in the industry, there weren't a lot of women in the industry. Still aren't, actually. The attrition rate for women in tech is pretty abysmal. And I think some of that's going to get solved, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I do think that, as you get pushed up, being able to just throw both feet into the fire and say, I'm not afraid, and I'll try it and I'll learn it, really kind of gets you there. And it helps get you that sort of, recognition, maybe not the best word, but it helps people build confidence that you're going to figure it out, because you do figure it out. And I don't know that there was more pressure being a woman or less. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself, which I think women do anyway, whether you're in a male-dominated industry or not. But certainly, I think that my point of view was different. Things are different, like raising kids and having to take off when kids are sick. But I also think those are things that made me a much, much better manager moving forward. I absolutely got it. If, it didn't matter if it was a mom or a dad that needed to take off when a kid was sick. I get it. Take off. Family first. I've always been a family first kind of person. And so I think, definitely navigating the whole industry, I see struggles of other women, and there's been some for me too, to be fair, but I do think that really working through those makes you a better person, and certainly makes you a better manager. Being in the Women in Mission Critical organization and Women in Data Centers and several of the others, really trying to expose more women to careers in mission critical. So I started a podcast about a year ago that is Careers for Women, Trades, and Vets in Tech. And this is kind of a culmination of some brilliant people I have been honored to interview on my podcast series that are from all different walks of life, including some diversity and inclusion experts and other women that have risen in their careers, anything from literally construction to the cloud, seriously, and kind of all things in between. And I will say that we do lack diversity in tech, and it's not just having a woman on the payroll. It's not just having somebody of a different ethnicity or orientation or whatever. It's just the diversity of thought. And that could be the same thing as having a department of mostly people my age and bringing in much younger kids. There's a diversity of thought there, right? They were raised with a device in their hand. They think things differently. They think things through differently. They have different expectations of what these devices are going to do. So I do think that diversity is important, but gender diversity, I think, is absolutely important. And the last study that I read, the attrition rate for women in tech was 67%. And that was last year. And that's not women that leave tech and find a different job. That's women that flat out leave tech. And I think part of that is that, we have these expectations that people work 8 to stupid in this industry, which, women tend to be caregivers, and 8 to stupid is not always the best hours to work. And also, I think that all of those different problems, being caregivers and all that kind of stuff, we've done historically not a very good job of using tech to solve the problems in tech. So for instance, if a mom needs to be home with her kid when she's ill, she should be able to work remotely. And a lot of companies just have had this absolute no way you're going to work from home policy. Thankfully, one of the good things that's going to come out of COVID is a lot of companies have realized that we can actually do that and sustain our companies, sustain our employees, and do make, a difference moving forward. So I think that's a good thing. And I think that's going to help solve some of these problems. I also think that, there's been a lot of times where women move around for a husband's career and may move to a city where tech is non-existent. I know that there's been, the number one reason cited in that particular survey was harassment and bad working conditions. And I think we're getting so much better at all of those things. And I think we're really just sort of on the start of making that push to where we really are doing those things better. And as far as younger girls and encouraging younger girls to get into the STEM fields, I think a ton of it is exposure. So it's partly things like the podcast series and reaching out and going to Girl Scout troops and Girls Who Code and all these elementary schools and junior high and high school. So one of the things that came out of my podcast that I found out was that most children decide what they're going to be by the time they're 6 or 7. And that's because that's what they've been exposed to. So if you don't expose kids to these careers, they're not going to pick them. I was the same way. I didn't pick a career in tech. That was not where I was going. I was kind of exposed to it. My grandma wrote code for the state of Michigan. My grandmother and grandfather on my father's side of the family met in engineering school. So I knew what they did. I mean, I knew they did it, but I didn't really know what they did. It wasn't a granular thing. So now, we take our kids to work. We have all these other means to expose our children. And I think that's really a great thing to help bring some awareness. We also have things like Girl Scouts and all these scholarships that are available now to really bridge that gap. But we've got to reach these girls much, much younger, I think, and boys and, anybody that wants to be in tech. Because especially in the data center industry, I'll say this, for years, we've worked really hard to make sure that our data centers were nondescript buildings hidden somewhere, and people didn't know what they did. But if you're listening to this and you don't know what they do, if you pick up your phone and you send an email, that email gets stored in a data center and it gets forwarded to another data center for somebody else to receive. If you look at TikTok or YouTube or any of those, all of that stuff is stored in a data center. And that data center is a big building that's very complex. It's not, it's not like a laptop you have. It's like hundreds of those, thousands of those. They all have to be cooled. We have to reject the heat they create. We have to supply power. We have to manage that well. We have to figure out what we're going to do if something goes down to make sure that it comes back up or that there's a failover to that. We have to make sure it's backed up so if it completely fails that we can restore that information. So it's all very complex. It's a lot of moving parts and pieces and cogs in the wheel. But we've done a really bad job of people understanding that. We view tech as the fourth utility. So it's just like when you flip a light switch, it's supposed to come on. When you turn your phone on, it's supposed to come on and communicate. And we expect everything from the telecommunications to that data center, all of the networks in between. We just sort of take for granted that they're there, just like the power. And when they go out, we get upset. And so in this industry, there is a big piece of that where we're just trying to keep the stuff up and running and keep it going and make sure that happens. And it takes every skill set. There's only 34% of men and 35% of women currently in this country that have bachelor's degrees. Think about that. We can't fill every single job with people with degrees. And most of these companies will pay for your degree. But that's not really a great perk if they only hire people with a degree, right? Because then you already have one, unless you're getting a different one. But I think that we're really getting to the point where we're doing a lot more skills-based hiring, and people are looking at the skills that somebody brings to the table, not the piece of paper that somebody brings to the table, and really want to, as companies, grow these employees and grow within. We do have a problem in this industry as a whole, and this is everything from telecommunications to the data center, where we have way more jobs than we have people. A lot of that is because they're located in cities where the people that want to work in those jobs don't live, which again, I think this whole remote work thing is definitely going to be a help there, at least where that's possible. But we also have another problem in that a lot of our workforce is going to retire within 5 years. And so it's not just the open jobs we can't fill, it's the whole backlog of positions that are going to be needed when all of us retire, and somebody's going to have to come back and fill in those. And plus, the more we do with tech, the more we want to do with tech. So the demand there is always there. And I think tech is very much like anything in a medical career. There's always going to be work for you. There's always going to be something that you can do. So when I talk to young girls and work through programs that reach out to schools and Girl Scouts and all of those things, part of that is, there's a lot of security in tech, but there's also a really sexy side of tech. Like I said, I've got 4 million miles under my belt doing projects all over the globe. I have a massive extended family all over the globe, and I've met all of them through jobs that I've done in tech. So there's really kind of a cool side to tech too that I think we really need to expose people to and get away from the nondescript building and create curriculum around what we're actually doing in these data centers. And there's some colleges doing that. And there's a big push right now in the industry to start making these careers more accessible and more visible, and not just be, oh, well, we have a program where you can learn to write code, because there's so much more to it, and so much more to crossing that whole diversity and creating that gender equality within our jobs. And certainly reaching out to veterans in the industry is another thing that I think that's super important. So again, that podcast series is Women, Trades, and Vets in Tech. And the veterans, I think, are particularly well suited for anything in tech because they bring this discipline that they've learned through the military, and it's very methodic and very procedural. And there's a lot of jobs in tech that are like that. You have to dot the I's and cross the T's, and you have to, make sure everything fits in a certain form or function. And of course, there's also jobs that are not quite like that, but I do think that they bring a very special, perspective and discipline into those jobs. And really, I think it's important to support those guys that support us, because, without our veterans, we would not be where we are today, and we wouldn't enjoy the freedoms that we have. So I think it's really important coming back as a civilian. There's a couple organizations that I work with that work very closely towards bringing veterans into the industry. And a lot of that was started by this company called Salute, and they're amazing. So they bring vets and their spouses, which I think is also really, really important, because spouses of veterans, sometimes their resume looks rather sporadic because they've had to move a lot with the military. But, getting them their skills and getting them trained and then getting them viable careers. So I think, I applaud the work that Lee Kirby has done at Salute. He's brought this now to Infrastructure Masons and several of the other industry organizations to really highlight and help those veterans have great careers when they transition out of the military. As a CTO of StrategITcom, the role for promoting green technology, I think, is one of the funnest things that I do. So right now, just to give you an example, I'm working on some projects for edge compute, which is those same data centers, but brought to a city near you, and probably several of them around that city near you, for things like city services and communications and bridging the digital divide. And 5G, which you hear a lot of hype about, mostly because I think, there's a lot of devices that need to be upgraded to support that. And certainly because the greater bandwidth, it'll provide some services to folks that have not really had an option for good broadband, which is that digital divide I talked about. But these edge data centers can be built anywhere. They can supply that bandwidth and provide all of those city services. But now when we start spreading all of that compute all over the place, and 5G takes a lot more power than 4G or the previous iterations, and we think of other things, like there are tractors right now that will roll around a field and they'll weed your crops just like the Roomba does for the dirt in your living room or wherever. And all of this technology takes sensors and communications. So literally there is not a piece of the planet that at some point will not be touched by this. But as we do all this, there's power required for that. And so we have to be good environmental stewards and take care of the land that we live in and make sure that we're doing things like trying to be greener in how we compute, and make sure that, you know, it's not just how many servers you put in or how many devices that you put in. It's how energy efficient you are when you do that, and how well you guard all of those little atoms of electricity and where they go, and make sure that you're doing that in an environmentally friendly way. And so the cool thing about this project I'm working on now is the ability to take natural gas, which, you know, people think is not a very green technology because there's CO2, but you can sequester that CO2 and you can use it in greenhouses. The Netherlands have done that, and they are the second largest food producer by yield because they do that. They sequester that CO2 and feed it to greenhouses, and you can use it to harden concrete. There's lots of different things that you can do with that CO2, but there's lots of ways that we're getting better and better. We have renewable energy being solar and wind, although both of those, while they're great and technically free because they're renewable, because we use the sun and wind, we still have to have a lot of batteries because it's a fluctuating source. And not only do we have a fluctuating source on this side, we also have a fluctuating demand on this side. And so, you know, you've got the ebbs and flows, and batteries, you store that energy and even it out. But batteries are not the best thing, with the exception of some of the newer battery technology that's out there, being sodium ion. But, you know, we still have a way to go, and there's a long time before we're going to be able to use renewables completely to satisfy what's on the grid. So if we can use a natural gas supply that is plentiful out there and available for use, and we can make that green and supply some power that way to the grid, I think that's great. Hydroelectric is another good one. There's lots of ways that we can do that. Being able to use outside cool air to reject the heat inside of a data center and from all the machines that are in there. So I think all of those are super important, and it's really been fun to watch this journey, because when I started in this industry, we didn't care. Like, literally, we didn't care. It was, you needed compute, you needed power, you got what you needed, you used it. And then, you know, then the whole idea became reducing the power bill through energy efficiency. And now it's really gone full force into environmental stewardship and making sure that we're doing the right thing all the way around with water and carbon and all of it. Having been in the IT industry for 40 years or so, you know, as far as witnessing new developments in technology, how do you adapt to the growing change? You just have to be agile. I mean, really, there's no two projects alike. There's no two solutions that are alike. And even if you did two that were alike this year, the technology is different from your suppliers the next year. The demands for the technology and what it's supposed to do is going to be different in 2 years. And so all of this really is, I think, for me, the biggest fun is the opportunity to continuously learn and continuously improve your skills and improve your knowledge. There's a lot of reading that happens. I think there's, you know, when you work through a lot of these great organizations like AFCOM, 7x24, Infrastructure Masons, the Green Grid that really has done a lot on the sustainability front. All of these organizations are ways that you can network with your peers, figure out what's working, talk about what's not working. They also, most of them put on either virtual now, but used to be in-person trade shows where you can go and learn about new solutions. So it really is fun. It's kind of this puzzle that never ends. And so you just keep pulling a piece of this and a piece of that and a piece of this and putting it all together and wrapping a bow around it, and then realizing, you know, in 3 years, you're going to have to unwrap that package and add some stuff to it and take some stuff away from it, wrap it back up in a different bow and use that for 3 years. So it is kind of fun because it changes all the time. And I think too, that it's important to have that sense of creativity, because there's nothing in tech that's black and white. I mean, there's no, it only works this way or that way. I mean, there are a few things, I guess. Computers are stupid. They understand zeros and ones, but how you get to those zeros and ones is definitely a creative process. What you make that front end look like, or what services you provide out of that application, all of that is very, very different. And so being able to suss out, what's going to work best for this solution, or doing creative things. Like years ago, I wrote a software package for a company that did custom furniture, and realized once we rolled it out nationwide that tax laws are crazy different. So in some states, a sofa is considered a luxury item and they put a luxury tax on that. So how do you figure out, from that zip code, what that tax rate is based on that piece of furniture and the cost of that? And then when it goes over a certain amount, it's another sliding scale. So I think you have to be able to sort of fluctuate in your brain kind of how that's going to look and how that's going to sort out. And I will say sometimes you do things that are maybe a little too early. I wrote a program years ago that you could scan barcodes and it would do all of your groceries in aisle order in a grocery store. And then everybody said, oh, it's too early. Nobody's going to do drive up groceries, and go figure. But, I think that having that creativity and just really, enjoying that tasking your brain definitely helps. And, as far as the global nature of my profession and, traveling around the globe, I think the most meaningful part of that journey really is the people. And you find, it's crazy. You realize that people think we are what they see on 24-hour news, which is horrible because most of us are not. You also realize that you think about other people, what you see on 24-hour news or what you've been exposed to, and they're really not. We are all across the planet. We're so different and we're so very much the same. We want a good job. We want to put food on the table. We want to take care of our families and take care of our kids and make a difference and hopefully leave the world behind a better place than we started. And I think we all have these goals, but we just go about them in different ways. And I think really that kind of ties back to diversity and why it's so important to have all of these different perspectives, because, sometimes it just really rings a bell, I guess, that there's more than one way to go at things. There's more than one path to get from point A to point B usually. And well, always. You might have to walk instead of drive a car, but there's always different ways to get there. So I think really that's pretty cool. And I will say that going to some places that are far less fortunate than we are here really is an eye opener, and it really helps you be so thankful for what we have. And, things like in the cities where you have steady internet connections and you can continuously communicate. And, years ago when I started this, we really didn't have any of the internet communication models. It was email. That's how we kept up with each other. Email. There was no Facebook. There was no Zoom. There was no Teams. There was no any of that. And we've come so far, I think, and it's just such a great way to be connected to the rest of the world. But I really encourage everybody, especially from travel and what you can take from somebody that has done a stupid amount of travel, that we really are way more similar than we are different. And we have to really work towards those similarities with our global peers, because we're all in this together. We're all part of this big giant communications machine. And I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that tech is used for good things. Like, that's one of my favorite things about tech that's used for good. So a good example is when they started printing these 3D prostheses for kids that needed hands and legs, and they used 3D printers to make that happen for a few $100 as opposed to several $1,000s. Like, what a great way to use tech for good. And then those little plans got shared amongst the tech community, and now they're all over the place. And so I think there's so much good that can come out of what we do, that we just have to be good global citizens and make sure that we're, trying to use these things for the right things and not for the wrong things, and understand that sometimes they're going to be used for the wrong things, but we have the ability to make that change. your voice is absolutely equal, important, and necessary. And your life experiences are different than mine and different than every other woman on the planet. But together we can make such an amazing difference. And I think that we as women probably take that to heart as a whole. And I think we also have to be very careful as women that we support each other and we uplift each other in our roles as women in this industry and not view it as a competition, because we're not in competition with each other. We are an amazing collective voice. We also are an amazing singular voice. And I hope that as you move forward in your career, in whatever industry that is, that if problems and adversity happen, that you don't first assume it's because you're a woman. Take that time to reflect inward and see what you could have done differently, to see if it was just an impossible situation, and the best thing to do is say no. But don't just automatically raise your hand up and say, oh, that was bad because I was a woman. Make sure that you give yourself that time to reflect and grow from that. And maybe it was the situation, but at least give yourself that time to self-assess. And just keep in mind, together, we can do some pretty great things. So that's been my little question and answer. I hope you found it informative. Please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to do that. If you need a mentor, you need a voice of, just to bounce something off of, I'm always happy to do that whenever I can. So I hope you reach out. I hope you connect, and I hope you have an amazing life. Thanks for listening.